supposed to have sent it? Where did that come from?
I know. Why are you asking Nicole about that before it's on?
I'm like,
I had a little girl at my house, my daughter's best friend on Monday.
okay. All right, we are live. Welcome. Today is Tuesday, January 19th, 2021. We're going to begin our meeting tonight by indicating who's here. Let's start with Connie.
Connie Burgess.
Clark Nelson.
Nicole McDermott.
Martin Bates, Superintendent.
Julie Jackson.
Terry Bodden.
Chris Wynn. And Karen Winder. We'd like to welcome those here tonight in attendance and also those joining us online. And thank you. We know the hour is a little bit earlier than we normally start, but we have some things to get through today as well as be ready for a district community council at 7 p.m. We wanted to play it safe and not be late for that later meeting. So that is why we are starting a little bit early tonight. Really not tonight, this afternoon. We're going to begin. First thing on our agenda is an action item of an administrative appointment. Board members, I think you've had this for a few days. It's a single name. Whoa. My microphone just went different. Can you still hear me? Yeah. Oh, nice. Okay. So I'll entertain a motion for that action item.
I move that we accept the administrative appointment.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second on the table to approve the administrative appointment. Any questions, concerns, board members? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion passes.
Could we give John 2 minutes just to tell everybody who that is?
Absolutely. John, where are you? Oh, there you are. All right, if you'll come forward and let the public know who we just approved and to what position.
Okay, Board of Education and Superintendency, it's my privilege to basically give you some background information on Mandy Chappell. Mandy Chappell is the new assistant that we've assigned to Valley Junior High mid-year because Jen Jacobson resigned her position. She's decided to stay home and raise a family. So we'll miss Jen, but we're grateful to have Mandy Chappell back. When I say back, she was a longtime teacher in the GTI. She taught pharmacy tech and was actually an excellent teacher. In fact, she received the Excel Teacher of the Year award once. And she has currently, well, before she left us for a brief time, she was an intern assistant at Benyon Junior High, and then she was the assistant at Jefferson for a couple of years. Then she left for a few years to go to Davis to be the CTE director, and now she's coming back to us, and she's excited, and we're excited to have her at Valley. So,
Thank you, John. I know Jen Jacobson well, and we wish her well in her new role in her motherhood. And she's been tremendous at Valley. I visited with her often there with Rich Nilsson, the principal, and we'll miss her. We thank those from the district that have actually stepped in over the past few weeks, just in a temporary role to keep things rocking and rolling at Valley. And then we're excited to welcome Mandy there. So thank you for that, John. Okay, the next item on our agenda is Davis demographics. Population analysis discussion. We're going to turn the time over. It's Steve. Are you the point person on this? We'll turn the time over to Steve, but just a little preface on this, and maybe I'm jumping the gun, Steve. But so as a board, last year we kind of wanted to look overall at our demographic population studies. Last year there were no boundary studies, which is highly unusual because there's always shifting populations of students, and so we've got to keep balances, and Steve will go over that a little bit. But so we thought, you know what, we need kind of a bird's eye view from this, somebody who can come in who's professionally studied this and then come forward with, some insights, perhaps some suggestions or recommendations in how the next, 5, 10, 15 years are going to look for our district. We do have a declining student population year over year, and so we'll be addressing a lot of those things. But to be clear, no decisions of any kind are happening tonight. This is informational. So as we look at this presentation, I know a lot of people will be interested It's probably going to raise a few eyebrows, and that's okay, but just know this is informational only and to get the discussion started. So,
And we might even say we're receiving a report from the consultant, but these aren't even recommendations at this point.
correct. So with that, we'll turn the time over to Steve.
Okay, thank you. And in fact, I'll give this will be Davis Demographics presentation and report here for the most part, but a very, very brief introduction, especially there are a few new faces. So again, by way of quick introduction, my name is Steve Hogan. I'm the Director of Planning and Boundaries here in Granite School District. And I've been in this position about 7 years, and I've kind of become a frequent flyer in this position or to a lot of our board meetings and other meetings. And it's my pleasure to do so. I enjoy what I do, and it's an important part of what we do here is to plan for the best education of our students. So and a quick mic check. How are we sounding in the back and everywhere else? Everyone can hear. Raise your hand at any point if you feel like it's not loud enough. I'll just almost touch it to my mask if necessary.
Steve, let me make a quick point. This is the first study session. Well, it's one of the first study sessions for most of our board members. Not that regular board meetings are scripted, but study sessions are deliberately not very scripted at all. And so we've got the presentation, and it's really, these study sessions are designed for lengthy, in-depth questions and answers and discussion. And so as we jump in here, we expect this is going to take not 3 hours, not 2 hours, but we might spend 45 minutes, an hour, maybe a little bit more on this discussion here. So
Fantastic. Thank you. Quickly, just a couple of things. I chair what's called the Population Analysis Committee. You'll hear me and other people often refer to that as the PAC, or when we say the PAC, PAC, that's simply what we're referring to. And that's a group of 10 or 12-ish people here, mostly in the district, and some other stakeholders that help make recommendations typically. But the PAC is an important part of this. I don't make just general background, these recommendations. But again, so we're going to jump right in. I'm going to turn some time over to Scott. In fact, most of the time over to Scott. I, in fact, will jump back in the middle of the presentation to go over a couple of slides that are very, very important to understand internally, and then let Scott finish up from there and then go to the discussion portion for there. So without further ado, Scott, can you hear us? And you're on.
Yes, I can hear you, and good evening, everybody, or afternoon. Thank you for having me. Just as a quick introduction for me, I'm Scott Carlucci with Davis Demographics. We're a firm that is 100% a demographic firm for K-12 school districts. We have about 300 students throughout the country. I've personally right now working on about 4 different committees similar to yours, looking at some demographic studies and figuring out how the future is. So we've got wealth of experience and knowledge of doing these kind of things. We're here to assist you and get the best solutions that we can for you. And I believe I'm going to start sharing my screen. Can you all hear me okay? Hopefully. Good. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. And of course, the one I want is not available, so let's do this. Let's try this again. There we go. All right, are we seeing the header page?
We saw it for a second, Scott, then it disappeared. So now we have just you.
Let's try it again. Nobody wants to just look at me. Are we good now?
There we go.
All right. So I'm going to just go through the forecast that we did, our methodology, so you understand the data that goes into it, and just some brief analysis of what we've done. Definitely want to make sure you understand the data, that we're looking at a wealth of data that we have from the district, putting it together, putting it through our forecast model, and then coming out with our results here. So forecasts are done for each of these districts, 1,100 plus study areas. These are small neighborhood areas. I'll talk a little bit about them more later. So there's 1,100 separate little calculations being done, so we can look at it various different ways. We use the 2019-20 student data and historical data, 4 years of data previous to that. We stayed with the 2019-20 data instead of doing the 2021 data because of the pandemic. There's so many unknowns and questions and anomalies that we're doing everything based on 2019-20. Everything we do is based on residents. The reason we do this is because where the students live changes much slower if you look at a neighborhood than where their school enrollment could be. School enrollment can move almost with the principal changing schools, a program moving schools, a teacher leaving. There's many factors that happen that can almost be changed annually for a school enrollment. But in area of residence, those type of neighborhoods turn over and change much slower at a slower pace. So when we're looking at future facilities needs, we want to make sure we have the seats where the students are. So that's why we look at everything based on residence. We graduate 12th graders and move up the rest. Now there's 3 main factors that are influence the student population. Kindergarten. Now this is a combination of current K and area births. We look at that as area births fluctuate. We assume 5 years later that there's going to be a similar fluctuation in K class. New housing. We look at the residential development schedule, phasing schedule, and apply a student yield factor to that. And then mobility, which is the biggest factor. This is measuring the students moving in and out of the district, from either moving from one area of the district to another, from housings, turnovers, things of that sort. So we'll talk a little bit about each of these factors in a little bit more depth. Start out with study areas. These are study areas created by your GIS department that I took and applied these factors to. Each of these study areas can range in number of students living to it, from maybe 5 to 75. They're coded to the school of attendance. These are coded right now, as you can see, as each of the elementary attendance areas. This way, when we're looking at this, we can then go and do an analysis down to a single individual study area, see where those students reside, see where they're going to school, any programs they are in, those sort of things. So as we have this wealth of data behind the scenes that we can do analysis on as you guys are making decisions, you can ask these various questions and we can get it down to this neighborhood level. So future kindergarten, resident kindergarten information. What we do is look at births in Salt Lake County and see those trends that are happening and apply those trends to what's going to be possible in the future. The assumption is that students will reach kindergarten 5 years after they're born. So I've looked at the births in Salt Lake County in 5-year increments. From 2005 to 2009, you can see there's over 19,000 births on average. 2010 to 2014, it dropped to about 18,000 births on average. This is countywide. And you can see that to 2014 class is the births in yellow there is the 2019-20 K class. So that's what everything's based on. So then looking in the future K classes, we looked between 2020-21 to 2024-25 K class, I'm sorry. We looked at 2015 to 2019 births to get the 2020 to 24 K classes. And they're all lower than you see what the 2014 are. In fact, you get down to almost less than 16,000 compared to only 10 years previous to that, it was over 19,000. Your area is experiencing declining births. That's even with an increase in population and increased residents. They're just not having births. That's a phenomenon that's happening throughout the United States, not only in your area. So we're just seeing this. This tells me you can expect less K students in the coming years. As you can see, you see the 2014, that's 17,886. That's higher than any of the subsequent 5 years of data. So mobility. Mobility is families moving in and out of the districts. How a student passes or graduates out and the family moves, and then another family moves in with smaller children. So this is how we look at that. Or they don't move out, all of a sudden there's no children there. So what this does is looks at each of these attendance areas, and I looked at it at each individual elementary attendance area. So again, if there's regional differences, one area maybe is attracting students, one area may be losing students as they're moving around, as people are changing their residence. And we track this. What we do is assume, say there's 100 first graders in 1 year. We would expect the next year to have 100 second graders. What I've done is looked at these for all 12 grades, all 11 transitions, and looked at to see for 4 years, are the students leaving or are they coming in the district? And now we're looking at this in areas that don't have development, because of course, if you have new housing, you're going to have more students coming out of that. We're looking at these built out areas and just seeing, is there kids coming into the school or leaving the school area that weren't there the year before? Your district overall has about a 50-50, so you're not really trending where you're gaining a lot and you're not losing a lot either. Here you can see, and there's a bigger chart in some of the data we have given. Green is positive, red is negative, anything below 100% is negative, anything above 100% is positive retention. The final piece of the puzzle is residential development. So we look at all the development that's residential, that's in the planning and development phase in the district. We talk to the individual communities, individual municipalities, the county, and we talk to the actual developers and try to get a feel for what's happening, when it's happening, where it's happening. So we break it into 3 main types of data: apartments, multifamily, and single family, because each of those types of housing will produce different types of students, different numbers of students. We talk to the developer, we get an idea of their phasing schedule, see when they're going to be occupied. At that point in the forecast, if there's say 20 units going to be occupied in 2020-21, we will add 20 units to that study area, and then that will then add students into that area for there. So for each of the different type of housing, there's an appropriate student yield factor. Single family gets the most students, multifamily the second, apartment seems to be the third. So, and then we look at it, and if we need to adjust student yield factors for say a very huge mini mansions for single family, we can do that. Or if we're having affordable housing, we could do that. So we could adjust the student yield factor for what's needed for the type of housing that has to be, that's being developed. So when we bring all those factors in, we can see that the forecasted enrollment is continuing to decline. In the 3 years of data previous to the 2019-20, there was a decline of almost 4,000 students. We're continuing to decline, but not at that same rate. We're about, for the next 5 years, we're showing about a 2,000 student decline, maybe a little bit more. That is across most of the district through most of the grade range. So from all those elements we brought together, births, development, and the mobility, we're still seeing a decline in the district right now. So then I think,
Scott?
Steve, you had a couple of ones?
Yes, this is where I want to jump in if we can, and I don't think you have those on your presentation.
I don't. Yeah.
On that PDF that I sent you earlier, it's on that one also.
I can probably pull that up if, give me a second.
Let me just say, as you're pulling those up, and let me give you a little, this is, understanding this next part is critical to really, there you go, that's it, that one right there. Critical to really fully understanding the impact of what Scott is saying. A lot of times when we talk about, and you hear in the communities about school size, most people are concerned about schools being too large. And of course, we know that that can happen. And a lot of that depends on the size of the building and the capacity and how many they can just simply hold. Oftentimes you hear the opposite of that almost is that, hey, the smaller is better. Smaller is better. Well, what a lot of people, when they say smaller is better, they're really talking about smaller classrooms. And we have to clarify, because even some people, though, are under the misconception that the smaller the school, total enrollment, that's a great thing, that's better. And that's not necessarily the case. In fact, it's not the case, I think it's safe to say, especially for us. We've been able to use data over a number of years, and a couple of years ago to come to some pretty solid conclusions about this. And we just called it, you can see there, our small school concerns. Now, one important thing to remember about small school concerns, it's more than just the number of total students enrolled in a school. We really define this by the number of teachers per grade level. So overall, based on our school capacities and our district, we concluded that best practices were a minimum of 3 teachers per grade level. Say that one more time, 3 teachers per grade level. And again, I know some of you have heard this before, but it's worth repeating because it's so important. And for those that are new, I'll go over this as much or as long as you want to, but it is that critical. So 3 teachers, as you can see at the top, per grade level is important. And this is why. And let's talk about small school concerns. Some of these, again, this list could be a lot longer, but here's a list of about 10 to 12 things. Split grade level classrooms. When you become too small or less than 3, that is almost always the case. You'll have 1 or 2 grades that are splits. In other words, they have 3rd and 4th graders, 4th and 5th graders, but multiple grades sometimes or all the time in a split level. It's not ideal teaching. Some superstar teachers can handle it, but it's not ideal. Lack of parental choice to match learning style and increase student success. Sometimes that's just a challenge. And when you have 2, in fact, sometimes 1 teachers per grade level, this simply leaves no other option. And if you've ever had a child in school and for whatever reason it just wasn't a good match, it's difficult to say the least. We can go into details of all of these individually if you like at some point. PLC and the Granite Way. Bottom line is the Granite Way that you're very familiar with and we've talked about many, many times is based largely on collaboration. And collaboration is very, very difficult when you have 1 or 2 teachers per grade level. We've seen that, and the data has shown this that over and over in our small schools. Again, kind of and going hand in hand with that is the team teaching model, where it's just extremely difficult. Reduced per pupil funding. This one is extremely important. Reduced per pupil funding that can create lack of funds for extra staffing and program supports. Most all of our after-school programs and funding grants, whatnot, most everything is done is simply on a per pupil basis. And when you're too small, you miss out. You're missing out on funds, and you don't have the supports necessary to maintain some of those critical needs that any school of any size needs, but especially a smaller school. Next one, Ben. Some of the other realities, it's harder to maintain effective school community councils, PTAs, and other parent volunteer efforts because there are simply fewer parents to draw from. If you have a school of 200 students, and that's fewer parents to help maintain and be active in all of those committees, and yet you still have the same number of those committees and same number of things that have to happen regardless of the size of the school. We see burnout, we see attrition at a higher rate in those situations, and that becomes a factor. Teacher workload concerns, similar to what happens with those fewer teachers and staff to fill the same number of committee assignments required for all schools. Not just committee assignments, but same number of needs with fewer people. So fewer hands for the same number of needs in our smaller schools. One ineffective classroom can greatly impact grade level data. For whatever reason, if a classroom is not effective, it could be, again, a lot of reasons. Bottom line, if one classroom is not effective and there are only 2 teachers there, or perhaps even 1 at that grade level, but if there are only 2, it greatly impacts the school data, the school grade, and just proportionally has a greater impact on the school. And of course, some of the obvious, it's not an effective use of administrator to student and teacher ratios. 1 principal for a school of 275 students, or 1 principal for a school of 600 students. And you could use that example for many things. If you can combine those and then do it even more effectively, then why wouldn't we do so? And finally, along with that is just trying to be fiscally responsible for use of building and district resources. If there are 2 buildings and they're both at 200 students, and those could be combined perhaps. It's those things, and the list goes on. I got with the directors, especially the elementary directors, over the last couple of years to come up with a pretty comprehensive list. These are some of the highlights. There are quite a few more, but in essence, small schools are a concern. We are trying to do everything we can to get our schools to that minimum 3, preferably 4 to 5 teachers per grade level. Some of that depends on the programs they have at the school, whether it's DLI or some other programs that might require a little larger size. But helping Scott understand what our needs are in our district, we gave him that information and asked him to come up, or not come up, but at least consider that data as he's as he's making forecasts. And so this idea is important to understand as we go forward for the next few slides. So do we want to take any questions on this part or wait until the end?
Perhaps we can just keep going, and then board members, if you want to jot down questions to not forget them, that would be awesome. We will have a good, robust discussion, so let's keep moving through.
Okay, Scott, we're going to turn it back over to you.
Sounds good. All right. Share my screen again. Are we seeing it?
No.
Nope.
Think I would know how to do this by now. All right, let's see. Share screen. Application window.
Almost.
Any luck?
Got it.
All right. So thanks, Steve. So with everything that Steve just said, we had long discussions about this, and we thought maybe we could show this a different way as we're looking for future needs. So that's what I want to make sure is that you have the proper facilities in the proper places. So just want to take a kind of a holistic look at this district. And just make some basic calculations just based on numbers, nothing else, and look and see what areas maybe you might have too many facilities in the future. So looking at this, we're looking at assuming that the target enrollment is 550 K-5 students per school. I grouped the district into 5 areas just to break it down into some manageable chunks to look at. The groupings came along natural lines of boundaries, major roads, and the attendance areas, trying to keep them compact and not weird looking. When you see the groupings, you'll see that they just kind of flowed really well. That was the only criteria I used for grouping the 5, and I did that. I looked at the total resident numbers in 2019 and then the forecasted resident numbers in 2022, and just divided that total by the 550 to determine the number of K-5 schools. So here are the 5 areas that I came up with. Again, like I said, they're just pretty nice, succinct areas. Was there a question?
No, not yet.
Okay. I thought maybe I got some feedback or something. So they're just 5, just kind of compact, distinct areas that I came up with, each with a number of schools from 9 to 15 schools in it, and we'll just go through all 5 of them, just show you what I came up with the numbers. So in Area 1, there's 13 schools and approximately 6,158 K-5 students living there in 2019, and within those 13 school attendance areas. The forecast is about 6,000 in 22-23. So in 22-23, there's approximately 11 schools would be needed at that 550 range. In Area 2, you've got 14 schools, and there's 6,300 living in 2019. Again, about the 5,900 for 2023. And at 22-23, that would be about 11 schools would be needed at that 550 level for K-5. Area 3, there's 15 schools. 2019-20, there was 7,100 students living there. It's forecasted to go about 6,600, give or take. At that 6,600 in 22-23, that would be 12 schools needed from the 15 currently there. Area 4 is 9 schools now. It's 3,791 in 2019. It's forecast to stay at that point. So in 22-23, we need about 7 schools for the 550 K-5 schools. And Area 5, there's also 9 schools. They have K-5 about 3,300, 3,400 in 2019, going to about 3,300 in 2023. So that's about 6 schools needed for that K-5. And with that, I want to open it up for discussion, and I'm sure you have plenty of questions for me, so I am here to answer those.
Thank you for that. We want to thank Davis Demographics. I know we have a lot of questions, but before we delve into those, there's a lot of work that this company has done to get us to such consolidated data that we're looking at right now. And so we appreciate this presentation and in putting it in terms that is very easy to follow, easy to understand, and see the results of. So with that, board members, we'll open it up for questions. Nicole, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. So I noticed in the last few slides, in Area 1 was my biggest concern, just because I know that there's a lot of those elementaries that are still K-6, and I don't know that that's going to change even by 2022, 23, because that would depend on the junior high being able to be rebuilt. And anyway, so was that taken into consideration at all? It just said it K-5.
Scott, I'm going to jump in, and you correct if you hear anything different from your study. But the scope of Scott's work, we directed them to do it as if everything was K-5, because we knew we would be there. That's the plan anyway in a couple of years. So that was taken into account. And so when we say that many schools, that many students in K-5, if you added everything up today, they're going to look different than the numbers you saw in the presentation. But we're doing this based on a forecast. So bottom line is, yes, that's based on a K-5 in-boundary enrollment.
Okay, so Nicole, go ahead, Clark.
If you're following up on that, go ahead.
I am, that was exactly my question, was also K through 6. And the way I understood it, until Cypress has the new building, we wouldn't be able to go to K through 5 in our area. Is that correct?
It's much more difficult to do that. And it typically comes down to Matheson. Matheson is it's a challenge to add a grade level or a grade to Matheson. So yes.
So essentially, until 2024, we can't really visit, I mean, these numbers aren't going to be accurate. Is that correct?
It's the goal. I think Scott's were based on the potential of doing this at 2023. But if Cypress is open in 2024, then that would be pushed back a year in that.
Well, and then we'd have to wait Brockbank is on there. So, that would be pushed back.
Pull your mic down and say
It'd be
that
later
again.
than 2024.
So
then.
2024 would be Cypress, but then is the building adequate enough to house Brockbank back up, or would that be another couple of years down the road? Still.
With the new building, I want to make sure we're following.
Don, jump in here.
Yes, Nicole, I followed you. So we have the opportunity of using the existing Brockbank as a junior high, or you could use portions of the Cypress campus to be that junior high. We have the ability when Cypress opens up to reconvene a junior high in the network. I wouldn't let that be the slowdown to reevaluate the network.
Okay, so 2024 is that is a realistic number.
I think for planning purposes, that certainly makes very good sense,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Clark.
You said that you're using a minimum target of 550. Is there a cap? Is there a max? Is there an average target that's somewhere above 550?
I'm glad you asked, because I want to clarify that number. 550 is a good average, if you will. Again, some schools can handle, and we want to handle. For instance, if you're looking at Diamond Ridge or a few of our newer schools, they're built for a capacity of somewhere between 750 and 850. And that's where they need to be and have the ability to be to handle all of the newer programs that we have and the student enrollment. So to rephrase, we are not trying to get every school to be 550. We are suggesting that to get an average of 550, some schools will still be 750 to 800, and that's fine, especially our DLI schools that need and want to be a little larger. And some schools will be below the 550, but the 550 was in math, you got to start somewhere with those averages, and that's where we landed. That's in between. The 550 is in between the 3 and 4 teacher per grade level threshold.
I think you said the RLI schools, we especially want to be bigger. What is RLI?
Sorry, and if I missed it,
DLI,
DLI, dual
yeah.
language immersion.
I didn't hear it was DLI, thanks. I wondered if this population study took into account kids moving to charter schools or moving to other districts based on what I consider newer law that I can't think of what it's called. Open enrollment.
Right.
Thanks, Don.
Scott, do you want
Yeah. Yes, that's why we look at the 4 years of data. And that's where I was talking about that mobility. If an area has a student moving out of it, that's where we'll look at 100 first graders 1 year versus the next year, the number of second graders. If students are moving out to charter schools, we'll see that there's a deficit of students in that area. So it's looking for all those students that are leaving the district and not being replaced by another student, such as kids. They actually didn't move out of the area, but they're not going to one of your schools now. So we'll see that in the historic data. And it's tracking that over a 4-year time frame, 3 years of change. and we're applying those averages of what's happening to the future.
I guess what I'm asking is, I feel like this data is telling us that this is how many students we're going to have. And I want to know if there is a trend that students are leaving by choice to other schools, or, because if so, then we need to consider that. And part of that is because I think we really need to recognize that with open enrollment, we are in a competitive market now, and we have to be competitive. And so we need to do whatever we need to do in order to keep our population of kids. Don?
I 100% agree with your last statement, but the question of whether or not we've seen rapid or relatively increased growth going to charter schools or others, private schools or out of district, that's been stable now for that 4-year cycle that Scott's referring to. So that's why it's reflected well in the projection. Should there be some other evolution? Yeah, that can always change, and that's why we need to look at these demographics regularly, because there can always be that change in where people are sending their students. But we've had that stable charter trend for a while now.
So should I interpret your answer then to suggest that any migration to charter schools is already accounted for, and the reduction that we're seeing and observing here is to decreased birth rates?
So Scott answered that by shaking his head that you had correctly interpreted.
Yes.
The demand, the community's pent-up demand for charter alternatives seems to have satiated right around 12,000 students. There was, in 1998, when the law was passed, there was a pretty steep incline. Terry knows, Terry's been writing me on this for 11 years now, to be more competitive and to be more responsive and to be insightful into what's going on there. But it's capped out, it's not a legal cap, but it's a practical cap right around 12,000 students, and has been fairly stable there for 3, 4, 5 years now.
And unfortunately, our competitive, the way we can be competitive versus a charter school is a lot different. We can't put.
Terry, speak into your mic so those listening in can hear you.
Oh, sorry.
There you go.
The way we can be competitive versus what charter schools can do is so much different. And we've talked, and I appreciate the superintendency for working on this. And, is our principals have to be very competitive and get out and do everything we can, and we need to improve our programs. But, these charter schools and other schools do advertising and all kinds of things. So it becomes difficult, but I think we have reached a plateau of where we're at. So.
This is one of the reasons that Scott's projections were based on 22, 23, and not 25, 26 or beyond. Of course, the further you go out with any projection, the less reliable they become. There are always variables, whether they're charter schools or pandemics or whatnot. There are things that just come up, and we have to analyze those every year. And that's what my department does, is trying to plan for those. But
A couple of thoughts on that, Steve, is I know in talking capital plans and I mean, we're not talking that tonight, but I know Don, plenty of conversations with Don. He says, our crystal ball's pretty good for up to about 5 years. And then beyond that, there's just too many other factors. And so when we're looking at this data, that's one of the reasons we went out 5 years.
yes,
Because there's some reliability with that data, but just a little side note. Plus, I also want to say, like I said, tonight's informational, board members, you've had fantastic questions so far. I appreciate everybody chiming in. Always keep in the back of your mind that there is no way we're going to be able to study schools in 5 areas all in a calendar year under one boundary study. So as we kind of mull over this and wait to hear recommendations from the district and Martin's team, basically, realize we're really going to try not to bite off more than we can chew, because these boundary studies, they run sometime a year, Or we've had some, the whole South Kearns, what did we call that? South Kearns
The Bangor Corridor Study.
Bangor Corridor Study. Thank you. I'm like, what did we call that? Bangor Corridor Study. That touched on so many schools. We actually studied it for 2 years. And when we say study it, it is a boundary study. Sometimes when we begin, we think it's going to head one direction, but as we study and learn and take a lot of comments and feedback from the community, it could well end up being something very different than we anticipated at the beginning. Most of them take a year. But if we feel it's necessary to study it out, we can always extend that. So as you look at this, when I first saw this, I was a little bit overwhelmed. I kind of thought, whoa, this is a lot of data. This is a lot of, maybe some unnecessary schools here and there. We have a lot to look at as a board, but just rest assured, we'll get through it together. We're not going to bite off more than we can chew.
Steve, you mentioned in some of the schools, they can handle more students.
Right.
Is that based basically on size of school?
Correct. Just simply capacity. Obviously, we have some older schools out there that are small. I mean, they're basically one long hallway, and if they get over 500, it's pushing their limits. And other schools with 500 feel empty. So.
Now, you mentioned also that there were some schools that could handle less than the 550. What is that based on?
Again, just simply capacity.
Capacity.
And again, one quick note about capacity. Capacity is I've talked about this often, is more than just number of classrooms multiplied by an FTE. And so there are a lot of things to consider in what I consider the true or realistic capacity. What programs are at that school, how the classrooms are used. I conduct building assessments where I go and walk each classroom with the principal and see how that building is being used, and then we determine that. So,
have we identified those schools in those areas that are large enough, that can handle more numbers, and those that?
Yes. Yes. In fact, I have quite a list of capacity that ranks those capacities. In fact, I've shared that with Scott, and he's used that in this calculation.
Thank you.
So I have a question. So, as Karen was saying, we can't really, this is a lot of information. So where is the starting point for you with this new information and this new study of how to proceed? Like, is there certain areas you're going to look at first? Is it, tell me kind of how the procedure goes from here of determining what schools would need to be maybe.
What comes first?
What comes
is what
first
you're
is
asking.
what I'm trying to ask. Thank you.
Steve, let me jump on that for a little bit. First of all, board members, you've noticed we haven't used the 2021 school year data at all. And that's because this is just a weird year. We've got hundreds and hundreds of Salt Lake District students that are artificially supporting our enrollment right now. Not speaking for myself personally, because in my family, we sure wish they would go back to school tomorrow. That's likely not going to happen. So for the benefit of the district, we're happy they're going to be with us all year long. I suspect next year, if they open their doors, that a lot of those kids are going to go back to Salt Lake. We don't know where all of that's going to level out. We do have our boundary, our population analysis committee pathway process. And I think there'd be a lot of wisdom in us looking at this policy a little bit over the next couple of months, getting familiar with that again. We utilized this as the culmination piece, Chris, of the South Bangor study, which came together with the South Kearns elementary boundary, which resulted in a closure of a school. And as we went through this process, it became pretty clear to the community how that ought to come together. I think there's room for conversation about this 550 number. Is that something that we really believe? I think everything turns on that. If we believe, and when I say we, I'm talking about the Board of Education, if we believe that there ought to be at least 3 teachers per grade, then that's important. If we don't believe that, then then it's a whole nother conversation. But I remember, for example, when the Morningside Elementary Community Council came and visited the Board of Education as a citizen participation time and said, this has been a number of years, they said, we've only got a teacher and a half per grade. We can't survive like this. What are you going to do? And we did some things. So when a school gets to that point, I think there'd be very few, if any, principals of a 280 student school who would not in a quiet meeting say, you know what, if I had 300 more kids, this would be a better place all around. Now, I'm not speaking for them, and perhaps you might want to, chat with some principals that have fewer than 300 or fewer than 400 or fewer than 500 students and ask them what their feeling is about that. In our conversations with our people, that's consistently, when you get to 3 teachers per grade level, a lot of things start to hum. When you get to 7 teachers per grade level, things start falling off. And so I think, Clark, you'd asked about a cap, and if that's what you meant, that starts getting kind of unwieldy. So I'd suggest we take some time getting familiar with the process, make sure we're still on board with that we look next October what our enrollment counts really are as these things process through. That we have some conversations amongst ourselves and perhaps with some of the schools in our precincts about that sweet spot, or when the things start to hum line, if we really believe in that. The other conversation that comes up frequently, Julie, I think you might have been going this way a little bit, but perhaps not. Scott, a reality check from my understanding. We watched, for example, the Salt Lake City School District, which is just north of us. They capped out about 45,000 students a number of years ago, and then they've declined, so to speak, to about 24,000 students and have been stable there for nearly 30 years. And it's my understanding, you're the professional, so this is the reality.
Can you go back? What district are you talking about, 45 to 24?
Salt Lake District had 45,000 students.
They're at 24.
And now they're at 24. They've stabilized at about 24.
I did not know that.
It's my understanding. Dave and I talk about, we went to the same elementary school and all of the schools that just aren't there anymore. But it's my understanding, and please correct this understanding, that nationwide, and certainly here in our community, populations stabilize at about 60% of their maximum. And that has to do with the aging of subdivisions. And so I don't know, perhaps there are examples of resurgences where you get back to a maximum, but my understanding is you never really get back to that maximum, even though everybody talks as though they are, that really neighborhoods stabilize at about 60%. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's a known number that people use for stable and built out areas, or areas that don't have a lot of increase. To speak to that, what's happened in Salt Lake, just north of you, Salt Lake City, and what's happening to you too, is there was a huge birth baby boom between the 1990s and early 2000, that those kids are now moving out of schools. So it's almost like, I hate using the word that you were at a peak and then you declined. It's almost like you're getting back to your normal level that you were prior to that boom. Because again, there was that big boom in births, and that every school district has seen that decline and that more leveling off. And it's not going to be continued. At some point, there is going to be that level and a stability that happens.
Chris, I don't know if that answered your question.
Kind of. I think more, I was just, this is too big of a, I think, are we just going to start looking at the schools that have the smaller school settings first as case studies, I guess is the right word? Or are we going to wait till our enrollment next year to see where we're at?
Yeah, so just to
How much effort are we putting into this now?
I think I know where you're getting at, what you're getting at. So basically, to restate, it sounds to me like this year we're going to get through COVID, We're going to look at our fall numbers. There are going to be no boundary studies announced this year. Is it fair to say that? Or is there something on the horizon I'm not aware of?
No,
Okay, so
that's correct.
come October, is once once we have our fall numbers stabilized, is that fair to say that's when we'll start to strategize? Well, we'll be strategizing prior, but is that when we come forth with our best thinking on where we should start? Is that more your question, Chris?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how much effort we're putting into right now versus let's see how enrollment is.
Right.
So is this just more information?
Martin or Don, who's going to take that? Don.
I'm going to jump in and list out a couple of things that are really on my mind as we think about this. The first is we clearly have a declining enrollment right now. So we're saying, hey, yeah, it's real, it's happening. We're probably looking at too many schools based upon the amount of kids we have. We'll reaffirm what that really means to us in October, right? Because we have to cross our fingers that we start to normalize a little bit more. So that's a great point to look at. In the interim, superintendent did show you that process. We'll be coming back to you with the boundary policy adjustments that help us fine tune our current language to what state law has. And so this is going to be on your mind, right? I mean, it's not going to be oh, I forgot about it. Here October is, now we jump into it. No, we'll be there. We'll be talking about those things. Behind the scenes, we'll be tweaking some numbers and looking at feeder patterns and things of that nature that we haven't even talked about today. So we have some internal work to make sure that we can speak intelligently come the fall, right? And then based upon board's direction of the philosophy of school size, teachers per grade in particular, that allows us to really consolidate some good thinking with the PAC in the fall. And should we follow that process that we hammer out through this summer with the new policy, et cetera, we can then come back and give you a couple of thoughts on a study list in, well, basically 12 months from now is about how we do it. So that's kind of our, I'm going to call it our, maybe 25,000, 30,000 foot view of what's going on. Does that make sense, kind of our current thinking?
So basically, as board members, what I'm hearing is over the next, year, up until those fall numbers come out, we need to get really familiar with that policy and know it is very outlined in steps and actually mandated by law in some instances on who we need to notify when. We've got, there's requirements of X amount of days that we email postcards out. Here's when the open, town halls are for discussion. We're going to provide X amount of time for feedback. We need to make sure any local municipalities that, that boundary study touches are well aware. And Ben and Don, they're a great team to take care of all of those legal parameters, but as board members, our job is obviously to attend those and go in with ears wide open. It's kind of a speak less, listen more type of deal. And so just on the policy, I just want to make sure. And we've got a nice little infographic, and perhaps we can go over that in detail.
We can. And again, we're coming back with policy thoughts and changes to the existing policy. We need to tweak that. And so you'll have a good opportunity to study that with us in the coming months. As a matter of fact, I think,
some changes.
yeah, we'll have some changes. You'll be tired of Steve and Don and Doug and Ben.
So that'll be coming.
You just will.
Just sometime in the next few months then?
We'll
Is that when we
probably
can
come,
expect?
yeah, in the next couple of months, maybe March-ish with some language and some discussion.
Could you send us
Can we get?
policy now?
Yeah, that would be great.
And can you also attach the infographic? Because I think that, especially our newer board members, and I would actually like it too, just to refresher.
So just to be clear, you'd like the infographic and a copy of the current policy?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Ben.
Infographic being
This thing. There are a couple other pieces, Chris, I've just listed three things. As we're developing a study list, a couple of things that jump easily to mind or quickly to mind as places to start. I think we'd all want to look at really what are our smallest schools? Where are our very smallest schools? Because those would be the ones feeling it or not most poignantly. So there's that. A second consideration has got to be facility condition. So if we've got a facility that's really in trouble, that might be one to look at closely as well in terms of a neighborhood. And the third area, and that's related closely to the second one, is the rebuild remodel list. I know you attended some of the meetings that we held, but in every meeting that we held, members of the public said, now please, we'll vote for this, but commit to us that when it's time for a building to be rebuilt or remodeled, you don't just do it because there's a building there. And the board committed, no, we'll evaluate the need for buildings at that time. So those three factors would probably help inform which areas we ought to look at in first and in what order. Now, we'll not do that in a vacuum. We'll include you in that conversation as to why we're thinking that this area and this area and this area might be the best ones to look at now, and why this one might be one to look at a little bit further down the road.
Thanks, Martin.
Julie.
Yeah, I really appreciated, Dr. Bates, that you brought up that that we need to be committed to the number 550. Because I think that is true for us as board members. And I think that we should make sure that we ourselves have studied that out and know that that is where we want to head. Because honestly, from what the readings that I've done and the studies that I've read show either way, that there are lots of pluses to a small school, and that there are also lots of minuses to a small school, and that there are lots of pluses to a big school and pluses to and minuses to a big school. In fact, I was just reading a study this week about, I don't know, it was a study of like 75,000 districts or something. Anyway, and they came to the conclusion that kids who were dealing with poverty they performed significantly better in a smaller school. And this wasn't smaller class sizes, because I was sure to make that distinction too. But it was smaller schools, and the things that they were saying are the outcomes were things like, well, of course, student outcomes were better, but students were more accountable because people knew their names. Everyone in the school knew their name. Teachers were happier, and so they were performing to the best of their ability in all their magnificence. There were several other things. I can't remember all of them right now, but the point is that I think that we do need to accept all of this information and come to a conclusion about what is best for the unique needs of each group of kids in our area. Because there might be an area where we do feel like a smaller school is really appropriate for this group of kids, or a bigger school is appropriate for this group of kids. And I love that we're averaging. I really appreciate that we're allowing for that fluctuation and individuality. But I definitely think that we need to look into it and make sure that we as individuals are committed to that number or not committed to it. And I don't know if maybe that's even a study session or something like that we could all look at together, information and data.
Yeah. And I think I have some good thoughts on this. Having gone through some really hard boundary studies over the last couple of years, a lot of these small schools have landed right smack in my precinct. And prior to them even being studied for boundary changes or possible school closures, I have sat in those community council meetings in 2 schools, sub 300 kids. And let me tell you, it is nearly impossible. They were putting their FTE on the board. The principal was there. The very depleted community council was there because they had families leaving, and those families that were leaving were the parents who served in community council and PTA. And on the board, there was a one point in one particular school where every grade had 1.5 teachers. There was another school where a grade had 1 teacher, but then the next grade up had 1.5. So an important thing, board members, as you think about this, you have to keep in mind that Granite Way, we're set up such that collaboration is such a huge piece of how we operate, of how our schools are set up and our expectations. And so, Julie, you bring up a great thing. We do need to just consider that number and all that it entails. And so I think it kind of, it sounds like we don't have anything to do until October. I think we actually have a lot to do from now till October. Like Julie referenced, get to know your schools, the school size, have conversations. Are there pockets where small schools work? Perhaps. In my area, I've seen firsthand sitting through some very, very, very tough community council meetings where every single bullet point that Steve talked about, I was just nodding my head like, yep, been there, yep, been there. But we also have very different precincts. And so I think we need to obviously look at this policy, as Don has said. There might be some tweaks we need to do, and for sure get very familiar with it, know it backwards, frontwards, everything in between. Also go out. Now, let me tell you, there's probably some people listening in that know their school enrollment is low and they're absolutely freaking out right now, right?
For sure.
They're there. And so let me reassure you, we study these areas. It will be a year-long study. And sometimes the lower enrollment school, if they have capacity for more, they might not necessarily be the one to close. If that makes any sense. Dawn, do you agree with my statement, Steve?
Yes, for sure.
There's facility conditions, there's how many classrooms are available, there's
Walking
proximity
routes,
to walk routes, bus routes.
There are many issues.
It is very, very complex. So I just want to make sure that people listening in aren't just automatically, making assumptions, because we do have to study this out. So I just want to make that comment. Connie, do you have a comment?
I do. I also, as we read other studies, want to mention we have to put into account how we received money for our schools and how much money each of our schools have. It's hard to compare our district with other districts. So as we read, I hope we can really take into account all of the time and effort that you have done. And when I first read this and came studied and looked at this, I thought, oh, this is my area, and how understanding that my area is very, we've certainly gone past lots of students in my areas. So I appreciate so much what you've done. I appreciate what Davis has done for us, and I'm looking forward to studying more about it and helping our students be able to be the very best they can, and give them every opportunity that they can have in going forward in their education.
And as I'm hearing this, as a superintendency and staff and everyone involved, you are saying the optimum is a minimum of 3 classes per grade level. That's going to be a real driving force, right?
Correct.
Can I ask a question on that same? As I did the math, it seems like 3 classes is closer to about 500. Where's the 550?
Correct. Again, an average. So even if you do 25 students, which is high or low, but an average of 25 students per teacher, and we do that times 3, so 75 students per grade level, then that times 6 can be as low as 450. But again, that's the minimum. But we want to be closer, in actuality, to 4 teachers per grade level is closer to the ideal. So it's an average between the average building size and 3 to 4 teachers per grade level is why we settled on the 550 average.
And then just to follow that up, sorry, Clark, I know you have a question. But with the DLI programs and also the advanced learner programs, I guess my concern is that having my kids go to a DLI school, I see the need because you really are basically running two small schools.
Correct.
Are we looking at some way there's some schools that don't have enough to have two at least, because you really need two per
Of each.
non-English or non-DLI and two in the DLI. Are we looking at, I mean, would that be like ripping the Band-Aid off? Or are we going to just have the card conversation and say, look, if you don't have an enrollment that supports this, you can't have a DLI school? Are we,
Yeah, no, yeah.
It's a hard question, sorry.
No, it's a long answer. And you can always count on me for a long answer, Nicole. When the state first dangled DLI as an option, there are a couple of schools, William Penn Elementary being one, that saw that as the answer to a declining enrollment. They thought that would be the way to build their enrollment. What we've learned is that there are real tensions within a school when DLI class sizes are quite a bit smaller than the regular program class sizes. And so what we've allowed schools to do, DLI is a school program. It's not a district program. There's a state model, but it's not a district program. And so schools like William Penn have changed from that original state model to be able to manage that program within their existing FTE. And other schools have done that as well. The school that has the best, best is the wrong word, the school that most closely continues to match the state model is going to be Diamond Ridge, where they started with 4 or 5 teachers per grade level in the first place, and then added the 2 for the DLI. And that's been the most stable, most equitable distribution. So we've not, as folks have approached us and say, hey, let's do this new language, or let's do that new language, or let's expand this. We've said, not unless you've already got a base student enrollment of 5 teachers per grade level. Just as if we're going to start new, I think we need at least 5 teachers per grade level. Otherwise, you have those problems, those tensions that I know you're familiar with. In the schools that have DLI fully implemented, we've let them manage that themselves, again, because it's a school-based program. I'd be reluctant to say to a school, you know what, DLI, the way you've got it, isn't good, so we're going to take it away from you. I'd be reluctant to do that. Did that answer?
Sure.
Okay.
Did you have a quick note? All right, good discussion. I also just want to reiterate, board. I mean, this is just the beginning. We're going to have a lot more opportunity to flush out our questions and as we venture down this path. It's a big path to go down,
Karen,
but we will.
Can
Yes.
I just, I really, I'm still hung up on my own question there about the 550 number. I think it's important to be able to, I just want to make sure that when I make a decision, it's because I have the information. And I am certainly trusting of judgment, of course, of these amazing experts here. But also I'm accountable for the decision that I make. So I want to make sure that I am seeing all sides of the issue, and that therefore I can make a decision that I can stand behind on my own 2 feet when I look at people in the eye and say, we're going to close your school. And so that number is really important to me to be able to stand behind. And I really hope that we as a board will come together on a decision that we want to be confident in that number, because I mean, I know that part of my angst about it is that I'm new on the board. I know that's what that is part of it. Nonetheless, I got to be brought up to speed.
Absolutely.
that
I
make
have
sense?
no problem. I mean, your request of like looking at this in a study session specific to school enrollment, small school concerns. I mean, we can go deeper into that, bring people in who have experienced that. Interestingly enough, I was just talking to a different community council member who was involved in one of those schools I was mentioning, and she was so frustrated with the small school enrollment. She's one of the families that left to a larger school. And she just said, oh my goodness, if you need me to come and talk to anybody, it was night and day. From the experience she left and the experience that her kids had there to the experience she went to, she said, she goes, I had some angst, nobody wants their school to close. She said, but after I've gone what I've gone through, she said it was the right move. So I'm not lobbying one way or the other in that story, just to share that there are stories out there that perhaps we need to hear those and give Steve, Martin, even Don, Ben an opportunity to address that 550, because it's really you're absolutely right. This entire conversation really cruxes on, can the board come together? Do we believe in that philosophy? Because if it's a philosophy and a vision, then it should be applied district-wide, right? Which I think is another angle you're getting at, is we need to come and unify if we really truly believe in what this whole presentation is based on. So yeah, we can absolutely look into that further. Thanks. Appreciate
We
that.
also need to remember the promise we made to those who voted for the bond. And that is, we're just not going to keep a school, rebuild a school or remodel a school if the numbers aren't there and it's not what's best for the students. So
Yeah, we need to consider that
there's
too.
a whole lot
Yeah.
of things going into this.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
And we are a unique entity that we can reach into the pockets of our neighbors and basically through a tax hearing be able to raise taxes. But the bond was a little bit different process, the capital bond. We did have to put that out to a vote, and we worked feverishly, we meaning mainly the district, and worked feverishly as board members. We reached out as well to get that passed, and Terry's absolutely right. We did promise that we would be very conscious of how we spend those taxpayer dollars. Okay.
Sorry, and just the irony of it is that you're right, that they show that small schools are great for those that are in poverty, but those are the schools that struggle to staff their PTA and their community council, and those are
Yeah, see, those are questions we should ask and find out, like, what have people found about that? And
Yeah.
just to be clear, I'm not advocating for small schools.
no, it's just kind of the irony
I'm
of
like,
the whole
what
thing.
is the?
Yeah.
I want to make
Yeah.
sure I know
No,
what I
and that's
advocate
exactly, I think that's exactly a conversation we can have, because we do have board members with experience that have gone through those, but that's representing their own area, and our areas look different. So we do need to hear from experiences from all areas, but also maybe have Steve delve a little bit more, put some other things in the presentation too to consider, like, taxpayer dollars and those kind of things too. Well, board, I think we've had a good discussion. If no one else has any questions, we're gonna thank, I forgot your name. Scott, I am so sorry. I forgot your name. That won't happen again. Scott, for joining us and giving us the presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Board, we are going to now move into the last thing on our agenda. We need to adjourn to an executive session for two purposes. One is collective bargaining, and the second is character and competence. So if I can entertain a motion for that.
I move that we move to executive session
For the
I'll
purpose
second.
of
for the purpose of character and competency and collective bargaining.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second on the table to go into executive session for collective bargaining and character and competence. This is a roll call vote, meaning one by one. We'll start with Connie.
Yes.
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 Yes. All right, thank you, everyone who's here. And thanks for those